From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
One of the most discouraging things about this country is the lack of critical thinking by Americans. The educational system fails Americans miserably in any kind of analysis of what's going on. And any government line which is echoed daily by the mass media becomes gospel in this country.
Today, we remember the life of legendary journalist William Worthy. At the height of the Cold War, he defied the U.S. government by reporting from Cuba, China, the Soviet Union, Iran. He went to North Vietnam. The folk singer Phil Ochs once even wrote a song about him.
William Worthy isn't worthy to enter our door. Went down to Cuba, he's not American anymore. But somehow it is strange to hear the State Department say, you are living in the free world you must stay.
We'll air excerpts of our New Year's 1998 interview with Bill Worthy and speak to three guests who knew him. Investigative journalists Jeremy Scahill and former Washington Post reporter Scott Armstrong. He took documents Bill Worthy brought back from Iran and published them in the Washington Post when the New York Times refused. We'll also speak with Bill Worthy's close associate, photographer Randy Goodman, who went with him to Iran on a number of trips. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Dozens of people have been killed and tens of thousands displaced after unprecedented flooding in the Balkans. An estimated 3 months' worth of rain hit the region in just 3 days. About 1/3 of Bosnia's landmass has been submerged, affecting an estimated 1 million people. Dangerous water levels have threatened flooding at 2 of the country's power plants. Thousands are without water and electricity. The flooding has also washed away warning signs near the thousands of landmines that remain from the 1992 to 95 war. A recent European Union report warned countries are at greater risk of flooding due to human-driven climate change. Dozens of people were killed in Libya over the weekend in attacks by forces loyal to a renegade former general, Khalifa Haftar, who helped topple Muammar Gaddafi, launched an offensive in Benghazi in what he called a bid to root out Islamist militants. Haftar's forces also stormed the Libyan parliament building in Tripoli, demanding the government's suspension. The Libyan government has accused Haftar of attempting a coup. West African countries have declared a war on the militant group Boko Haram after last month's kidnapping of close to 300 schoolgirls. At a meeting in Paris, heads of state from Nigeria and its neighbors declared the Boko Haram a threat to all of Africa. Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan likened the group to al-Qaeda.
It's no longer the local terror group with some religious sentiment that started in Nigeria in 2002 to 2009. In fact, from 2002 to 2004, from 2009 to date, it has changed and is operating clearly as an al-Qaeda organization, can better be described as al-Qaeda in West and Central Africa. It's no longer the Boko Haram that came with the sentiment that Western education is prohibited and that women must not go to school.
Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan has faced sustained calls to resign in the aftermath of the kidnapping. Protests continued over the weekend, seeking accountability for the government's delayed response. Bala Usman of the Bring Back Our Girls campaign said her group will demand a face-to-face meeting.
We have written him a letter informing him that we wish to see him. We are requesting for an audience. We have not yet gotten confirmation, but even without a confirmation, we intend to march to the president on Thursday to ask him questions as citizens, to demand to know what is Nigerian government doing towards the rescue operations of our girls.
Funerals were held in the occupied West Bank over the weekend for 2 Palestinians shot dead during the annual Nakba Day protest. The father of 17-year-old Nadim Nawara called on Israel to try his son's killer in court.
As we bemoan over our son, our solace is that our son is a martyr in heaven. He died for his homeland. He died for his family and his people. He died in the Nakba Day. Israel will face its day. It is an unjust state which shoots boys holding stones. And this man who shot my son must be tried for the sake of justice and for my son's dignity. If he will not be tried, Israel will face its day. Our children will grow up and take revenge for my son and take back our homeland, God willing.
Another Palestinian shot in the protests was left in critical condition. Last week marked the 66th anniversary of the Nakba, or catastrophe, as the Palestinians call it, when hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were displaced during the period around Israel's declaration of statehood. California says it's preparing for its worst drought season ever after the wildfires that engulfed 20,000 acres around San Diego. Thousands of evacuees returned home after the weekend after firefighters contained the blaze. Speaking to ABC News, California Governor Jerry Brown said thousands of additional firefighters will be needed in a state on the front lines of climate change.
We're getting ready for the worst. Now, we don't want to anticipate before we know, but we need a full complement of firefighting capacity. The state's climate appears to be changing. The scientists tell us that definitely, so we got to gear up here. We here in California on the front lines, we got to deal with it. We've already appropriated $600 million. We had 5,000 firefighters. We're going to need thousands more. And in the years to come, we're going to have to make very expensive investments and adjust. And the people are going to have to be careful of how they live, how they build their homes, and what kind of vegetation is allowed to grow around them.
A federal judge has ordered the militaries to stop force-feeding a hunger-striking prisoner at Guantanamo Bay. Syrian national Abu al-Diab is among the dozens of prisoners who've refused to eat in protest of indefinite imprisonment and harsh conditions at Guantanamo. On Friday, District Court Judge Gladys Kessler ordered a halt to the force-feeding and told the military to preserve video footage of the practice until a hearing this week. It's the first time a court has blocked a force-feeding since the Guantanamo hunger strike began over a year ago. The telecom giant AT&T has agreed to buy satellite television operator DirecTV for $48.5 billion. It's the second major media takeover this year following the merger of Comcast and Time Warner, which remains up for federal approval. In a statement, the media reform group Free Press said the AT&T DirecTV deal would hurt consumers and stifle competition, calling it a result, quote, of more than a decade of short-sighted FCC policies that have encouraged consolidation over competition, they said. The auto giant General Motors has been hit with a $35 million fine over its concealment of safety defect linked to hundreds of deaths. GM began recalling millions of vehicles this year, despite knowing of a faulty ignition switch in its vehicles at least a decade earlier. The Transportation Department fined GM on Friday as part of its probe into the defect, one of several investigations underway by government agencies and Congress. Transportation Secretary Anthony Foxx said GM's silence caused deaths.
We know no one is perfect, but what we cannot tolerate, what we will never accept, is a person or a company that knows danger exists and says nothing. Literally, silence can kill. What we now know is that GM knew about this issue years before this past February. Since at least November of 2009, GM has had information linking ignition switch problems with airbags failing to deploy. They had that information, and they told no one.
GM recalled another 2.7 million vehicles last week, bringing the total this year to 12.8 million. The Arkansas Supreme Court has halted same-sex marriages 1 week after a state judge struck down a ban on marriage equality. Hundreds of couples obtained licenses in the days after the initial ruling. But Arkansas justices put those unions on hold Friday, pending the outcome of a state appeal. The case is expected to reach the Supreme Court, which set off a wave of state marriage equality rulings after overturning the Defense of Marriage Act last year. Idaho also saw its marriage equality ban struck down last week, but same-sex marriages have also been put on hold as a court weighs a state request to appeal. A Missouri death row prisoner, is seeking to have his execution captured on videotape for potential evidence of cruel and unusual punishment. Russell Bucklew is set to die this week for a 1996 murder. Bucklew's attorneys want the execution filmed in case he survives and wants to pursue legal action, or if he dies and his state wants to file a claim. They argue his chances of suffering a painful death are heightened by a rare medical condition that has left him with vascular tumors partially blocking his airway. A doctor who examined Bucklew says he will be at great risk of choking and suffocating. A botched execution in Oklahoma last month left the prisoner writhing in pain on the gurney before dying 45 minutes later of a heart attack. Stephen Hawkins of Amnesty International said videotaping would help lift the veil of secrecy surrounding executions.
At this point, there have been journalistic accounts of people writhing, accounts of people saying they can't breathe, and just when it gets bad, the state closes the curtain. We want to stop that curtain from being closed so that the public can see firsthand just how barbaric, how torturous executions are, even under these so-called humane lethal injection procedures.
A lawsuit filed by several media outlets last week called on Missouri to disclose the type, quality, and source of lethal injection drugs. And the labor organizer and educator General Baker has died. A founder of the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, Baker helped organize wildcat strikes at Detroit auto plants in the 1960s. He was also one of the first public draft resistors during the Vietnam War. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.